The autumn of 1916 marked a pivotal moment in the history of aerial warfare. As the Great War raged across the muddy trenches of the Western Front, the German High Command recognized an urgent need to reorganize their air forces. The Battle of Verdun had exposed critical weaknesses in German air superiority, while the Battle of the Somme demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of coordinated Allied air operations. It was against this backdrop of aerial crisis that Royal Prussian Jagdstaffel 11 came into existence, destined to become the most successful fighter squadron in the entire Luftstreitkräfte. On the 28th of September, 1916, the official order was given to form Jagdstaffel 11 from elements of the 4th Army's Kampfeinsitzerkommandos, Commandos, KEK-1, KEK-2, and KEK-3. These specialized single-seat fighter units had been operating independently, but the German military recognized that consolidating their scattered fighter assets into dedicated squadrons would create more effective fighting formations. The squadron was officially mobilized on the 11th of October, 1916, at La Braille Airfield, near Douai, in northern France, marking the beginning of what would become aviation history's most celebrated fighter unit. The man chosen to lead this newly formed squadron was Oberleutnant Rudolf Lang, an experienced officer who brought organizational skills to the fledgling unit. Lang faced immediate challenges in establishing Jasta 11 as an effective fighting force. The squadron initially received a motley collection of aircraft, including outdated Fokker E-4 fighters and early Albatros models that were barely competitive with the latest Allied machines. More critically, the pilots assigned to the unit were largely inexperienced in the specialized art of fighter combat, having been drawn from reconnaissance and observation units where their primary role had been defensive rather than aggressive hunting. During these early months under Lang's command, Jasta 11 struggled to make any significant impact on the air war. From October 1916 through early January 1917, the squadron failed to distinguish itself in any meaningful way. The pilots flew routine patrols over the Arras sector, occasionally engaging enemy aircraft, but without achieving notable victories. This lackluster performance was not unique to Jasta 11. Many of the newly formed Jagdstaffeln were experiencing similar growing pains as they adapted to their new role as dedicated fighter units. The winter months of 1916 to 1917 were particularly challenging for the squadron. Operating from muddy, improvised airfields, the pilots faced not only the dangers of aerial combat, but also the harsh conditions of maintaining and flying temperamental aircraft in freezing temperatures. Engines frequently failed to start in the cold morning air, and the primitive heating systems in the cockpits offered little protection against the bitter cold at altitude. Morale within the unit began to suffer as weeks passed without significant victories to boost their spirits. Lang's leadership, while competent in administrative matters, lacked the inspirational quality needed to transform Jasta 11 into an elite fighting unit. He was a cautious commander who prioritized the preservation of his aircraft and pilots over aggressive engagement with the enemy. This conservative approach, while perhaps prudent given the squadron's inexperience, failed to develop the hunting instinct that would prove essential for success in fighter aviation. The pilots of Jasta 11 spent these early months learning the basics of formation flying, developing their marksmanship, and gaining familiarity with their aircraft, but they remained far from the deadly fighting force they would soon become. Everything changed on the 14th of January 1917 when Rudolf Lang was injured in a flying accident and forced to relinquish command. His departure opened the door for a new commander who would transform Jasta 11 from an undistinguished fighter squadron into the most feared unit in the skies over the Western Front. The man selected for this role was a 4-year-old cavalry captain who had already begun making a name for himself as one of Germany's rising fighter aces. Rittmeister Manfred von Richthofen assumed command of Jasta 11 on the 16th of January 1917, bringing with him not only 16 confirmed victories and the prestigious Pour le Mérite medal, but also a revolutionary approach to fighter tactics and leadership. Richthofen had learned his craft under the tutelage of the legendary Oswald Boelcke, whose tactical principles, the Dicta Boelcke, had become the foundation of German fighter doctrine. However, Richthofen would adapt and expand upon these teachings to create his own unique philosophy of aerial combat. From the moment he arrived at Jasta 11, Richthofen set about transforming every aspect of the squadron's operations. He immediately recognized that the unit's greatest weakness was not its equipment, but its mindset. The pilots needed to stop thinking of themselves as defenders and start seeing themselves as hunters. Richthofen instituted intensive training programs that emphasized marksmanship, tactical positioning, and most importantly, the killer instinct needed to close with the enemy and destroy him. The transformation of Jasta 11, under Manfred von Richthofen's leadership, was nothing short of remarkable. Within days of assuming command, the young Rittmeister had begun implementing sweeping changes that would revolutionize not only his squadron, but influence fighter tactics for generations to come. Richthofen brought to Jasta 11 a coldly analytical approach to aerial combat, treating each engagement as a problem to be solved through superior positioning, patience, and precise execution, rather than heroic acrobatics. Richthofen's first priority was to establish clear, tactical doctrine for his pilots. Drawing from his experience under Oswald Boelcke, he emphasized the importance of height, advantage, surprise, and concentration of force. However, where Boelcke had promoted flexibility and individual initiative, Richthofen demanded strict discipline and adherence to proven tactics. He instructed his pilots to avoid prolonged dogfights, which he considered wasteful and dangerous. Instead, they were to strike quickly from advantageous positions, preferably from above and behind, with the sun at their backs, deliver a decisive burst of fire at close range, and then disengage before the enemy could react. The new commander also revolutionized the squadron's approach to teamwork. While maintaining the traditional two-plane Rate as the basic fighting unit, Richthofen organized his pilots into larger formations that could provide mutual support while maintaining tactical flexibility. He personally led these formations, using his distinctive aircraft as a rallying point for his pilots. This approach allowed Jasta 11 to engage larger enemy formations with confidence, knowing that wingmen would always be nearby to provide assistance or exploit opportunities created by their comrades. Perhaps most importantly, Richthofen instilled in his men a ruthless professionalism that set Jasta 11 apart from other units. He had no patience for the romantic notions of chivalry that still influence many pilots on both sides. For Richthofen, aerial combat was not a sport, but a deadly serious business where efficiency and results were all that mattered. He famously stated that there was no art in shooting down an airplane, it was simply a matter of determination and proper technique. The impact of Richthofen's leadership became apparent almost immediately. On the 23rd of January 1917, just 1 week after he assumed command, Jasta 11 scored its first victory under his leadership. By the end of January, the squadron had claimed 4 enemy aircraft destroyed. February saw this number rise dramatically as the pilots gained confidence and experience under their new commander's guidance. The squadron's performance improved so markedly that higher command began taking notice, allocating better aircraft and more experienced pilots to what was clearly becoming an elite unit. The true test of Richthofen's transformation came in March 1917, as the Royal Flying Corps began intensive reconnaissance operations in preparation for the upcoming Battle of Arras. Jasta 11, now equipped with the superb Albatros D3 fighter, found itself at the center of fierce aerial battles as British two-seaters attempted to photograph German positions while escorts of Nieuport and Sopwith fighters tried to protect them. Under Richthofen's leadership, the squadron developed tactics specifically designed to break up these formations and isolate vulnerable observation aircraft. By the end of March 1917, Jasta 11 had claimed 36 victories, a respectable total that nonetheless paled in comparison to what was about to come. As April dawned, the Battle of Arras began in earnest, and with it came what would forever be remembered as Bloody April, the single most devastating month in the history of the Royal Flying Corps, and the moment when Jasta 11 established itself as the deadliest fighter squadron in the war. The statistics from Bloody April remain staggering even today. During that single month, Jasta 11 claimed 89 British aircraft destroyed out of a total of 298 claimed by all German fighter units. This meant that Richthofen's squadron, representing just one of dozens of German fighter units, was responsible for nearly 1/3 of all British losses. The RFC lost 245 aircraft, with 211 aircrew killed or missing, and 108 taken prisoner casualties that exceeded their losses during the entire 5-month Battle of the Somme. Richthofen himself led by example during this period, claiming 21 victories in April alone. His methodical approach to combat proved devastatingly effective against the aggressive but often inexperienced British pilots. Other members of Jasta 11 also achieved remarkable success. Lieutenant Kurt Wolff claimed 22 victories. Lieutenant Karl Schaefer scored 15. Richthofen's younger brother Lothar achieved 15. And even non-commissioned officer Sebastian Festner managed 10 victories. These numbers represented not just individual achievement, but the effectiveness of Richthofen's tactical system. The secret to Jasta 11's extraordinary success during Bloody April lay not just in superior equipment or individual skill, but in Richthofen's systematic approach to aerial warfare. The squadron typically operated in small formations of 6 aircraft or fewer, allowing for tight coordination while maintaining flexibility. These formations would patrol at high altitude, using their superior climb rate and ceiling to maintain the advantage over British aircraft forced to operate at lower altitudes for observation and ground attack missions. When engaging the enemy, Jasta 11 pilots followed a strict protocol. They would identify vulnerable targets, usually 2-seater observation aircraft, or damaged fighters, and attack in coordinated waves. The first pair would dive from altitude, delivering a surprise attack before zooming back up to safety. If the target survived, the second pair would already be in position to continue the assault. This relay system allowed the squadron to maintain constant pressure while minimizing their exposure to return fire. Richthofen also pioneered the use of visual identification to coordinate his forces in the chaotic environment of aerial combat. In January 1917, he had his personal Albatros D3 painted bright red, earning him the nickname the Red Baron. This distinctive color scheme served multiple purposes. It made him easily identifiable to his own pilots, allowing them to form up on his aircraft during combat. It intimidated enemy pilots who recognized the red machine as belonging to Germany's leading ace, and it satisfied Richthofen's considerable ego by ensuring that everyone knew who was shooting them down. Following their commander's example, other pilots in Jasta 11 began painting their aircraft in distinctive colors, though they reserved all red schemes for Richthofen alone. This practice of colorful paint schemes would eventually spread throughout the German fighter force, but Jasta 11 remained the most flamboyant, with machines sporting combinations of red, blue, yellow, and other bright colors that made them instantly recognizable in combat. The spectacular success of Bloody April elevated Jasta 11 from merely an elite squadron to legendary status within the German military. Recognition of Richthofen's tactical genius and leadership abilities led to a revolutionary reorganization that would create one of military aviation's most famous formations. On the 26th of June 1917, Manfred von Richthofen was promoted from squadron commander to wing commander, taking charge of Germany's first dedicated fighter wing, Jagdstaffel I. This new formation initially combined Jasta's 4, 6, 10, and 11 into a single tactical unit under Richthofen's unified command. The creation of Jagdstaffel represented a fundamental shift in German aerial strategy. Rather than dispersing fighter squadrons along the entire front, the High Command now concentrated their best units into a mobile strike force that could be rapidly deployed wherever they were needed most. This concept of tactical mobility gave birth to the unit's famous nickname, the Flying Circus, which referred both to the bright, garish colors of its aircraft and to its practice of moving from sector to sector like a traveling circus, complete with dedicated trains for transportation and temporary airfields that could be established within days. The logistical innovation behind the Flying Circus was as important as its tactical doctrine. The unit traveled with an entire support infrastructure, including mobile workshops, spare parts depots, and ground crew quarters that could be quickly assembled at new airfields. Special trains transported not just the aircraft, but also fuel supplies, ammunition, maintenance equipment, and even comfortable living quarters for the pilots. This mobility allowed Jagdstaffel 1 to appear suddenly in sectors where Allied air activity was heaviest, achieve local air superiority through concentrated force, and then move on before the enemy could adapt. With his promotion to Geschwader commander, Richthofen needed to appoint a new leader for Jasta 11. His initial choice was Lieutenant Karl Allmenroder, his trusted deputy, who had proven himself an excellent pilot and tactical leader. However, Allmenroder's tenure as squadron commander would be tragically brief. On the 27th of June, 1917, just one day after assuming command, he was shot down and killed during a patrol near Zillebeke in Belgium. His death served as a stark reminder that even the most skilled pilots of Jasta 11 were not invincible. Following Allmenroder's death, command of Jasta 11 passed to Lieutenant Kurt Wolff, who had been transferred back from Jasta 29. Wolff was an exceptional choice. At just 22 years old, he had already achieved 33 victories and demonstrated the aggressive hunting spirit that Richthofen valued. Under Wolff's leadership, Jasta 11 continued to maintain its position as the highest scoring squadron within Jagdstaffel 1, even as the other component squadrons began to adopt similar tactics and achieve their own successes. The summer of 1917 saw Jagdstaffel I and Jasta 11 inches particular receive a new aircraft that would become iconic, the Fokker Dr. 1 triplane. This revolutionary design, inspired by the British Sopwith triplane, offered exceptional maneuverability and rate of climb, though at the cost of speed compared to contemporary biplanes. The triplane's 3 wings provided enormous lift, allowing it to turn more tightly and climb more steeply than any other fighter of its era. In the hands of skilled pilots, it became a deadly weapon. The introduction of the Fokker triplane coincided with some of the most intense aerial fighting of the war. The Third Battle of Ypres, also known as Passchendaele, began in July 1917, and Jagdstaffel I was immediately thrown into action against massive British aerial offensives designed to support the ground attack. The concentrated firepower of 4 coordinated fighter squadrons proved devastatingly effective against British formations that were still adapting to the new German tactics. Within Jasta 11, several pilots emerged as exceptional aces during this period. Werner Voss, who had joined the squadron earlier in 1917, proved to be one of the most naturally gifted pilots in the entire German air service. Flying his distinctively marked Fokker triplane, Voss achieved 48 victories before his death in one of the war's most famous aerial combats on the 23rd of September, 1917. On that day, flying alone, he engaged 7 British SE-5 of fighters from number 56 Squadron, some of the RFC's best pilots in a swirling dogfight that lasted nearly 10 minutes. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Voss's extraordinary flying skills allowed him to damage several British machines before finally being shot down by Lieutenant Arthur Rhys-Davids. Ernst Ude represented another breed of exceptional pilot within Jasta 11. Unlike the methodical Richthofen or the instinctive Voss, Ude combined technical precision with theatrical flair. He decorated his aircraft with his girlfriend's nickname, Lo, and developed a reputation for spectacular aerobatics and daring attacks. After initially serving as a deputy commander, Ude briefly commanded Jasta 11 from March 25 to the 8th of April 1918 during one of Lothar von Richthofen's frequent absences due to wounds. The squadron's reputation attracted many of Germany's best pilots, creating a virtuous cycle where success bred more success. Young pilots competed fiercely for positions in Jasta 11, knowing that serving under Richthofen offered the best opportunity for victory and glory. This constant influx of talent, combined with the accumulated experience of veteran pilots, created an institutional knowledge base that transcended any individual member. Training within Jasta 11 evolved into a sophisticated system under Richthofen's overall guidance. New pilots underwent intensive instruction, not just in flying and gunnery, but in the specific tactical doctrines that made the squadron successful. Veterans would take newcomers on their first patrols, teaching them through example how to identify vulnerable targets, maintain formation discipline, and execute coordinated attacks. This mentoring system ensured that the squadron's tactical knowledge was preserved and transmitted even as individual pilots were lost. The squadron also pioneered new approaches to aircraft customization and maintenance. Pilots worked closely with mechanics to optimize their machines for their individual flying styles. Some preferred aircraft trimmed for maximum speed, while others prioritized maneuverability or stability as gun platforms. The squadron's technical officer, Lieutenant Konstantin Kreft, became renowned for his ability to squeeze every bit of performance from the unit's aircraft while maintaining exceptional mechanical reliability. By autumn 1917, Jasta 11 had evolved from a single squadron into the heart of a complex military organization. As the senior squadron within Jagdstaffel 1, it set the standard for tactics, training, and conduct that the other squadrons emulated. The unit's pilots had developed an esprit de corps that transcended national boundaries. They saw themselves not just as German pilots, but as members of an elite fraternity that stood apart from and above the ordinary business, war. This period also saw the development of the elaborate victory confirmation system that would make Jasta 11's scoring records among the most reliable of the war. Unlike many units that accepted pilot claims with minimal verification, Richthofen insisted on rigorous documentation. Victories had to be confirmed by ground observers, wreckage had to be located when possible, and witness testimony from other pilots was carefully evaluated. This systematic approach meant that while Jasta 11's official victory tally might have been conservative compared to some units' inflated claims, it was also among the most accurate. The death of Manfred von Richthofen on the 21st of April 1918 sent shockwaves through the German military and marked a critical turning point for Jasta 11. The Red Baron had fallen near Vaux-sur-Somme, shot down either by Canadian pilot Captain Roy Brown or by Australian ground fire, a controversy that continues to this day. For the pilots of Jasta 11, the loss of their legendary leader was not just a tactical blow, but a psychological catastrophe. Richthofen had seemed invincible, and his death shattered the aura of superiority that had surrounded the squadron. Command of Jagdstaffel 1, and by extension oversight of Jasta 11, passed to Hauptmann Wilhelm Reinhard, a capable officer who had previously commanded Jasta 6. Reinhard faced the impossible task of filling Richthofen's boots, while maintaining the fighting effectiveness of Germany's premier fighter wing. He brought a different leadership style, less coldly calculating than Richthofen, but equally dedicated to maintaining the unit's elite status. Under his guidance, Jasta 11 continued to operate effectively, though the pilots struggled with the psychological impact of losing their talismanic leader. Reinhard's tenure as Geschwader commander proved tragically brief. On the 3rd of July 1918, while test flying a new aircraft, he suffered a fatal crash when the upper wing of his machine separated in flight. The technical investigation revealed structural failures in the aircraft, but for the already demoralized pilots of Jagdstaffel 1, the loss of another commander so soon after Richthofen's death was devastating. The unit had lost 2 legendary leaders in less than 3 months, and morale reached its lowest point since the squadron's formation. Into this leadership vacuum stepped a figure who would prove controversial both during the war and for decades afterward, Oberleutnant Hermann Göring. On the 14th of July 1918, Göring assumed command of Jagdstaffel 1, becoming the last wartime commander of the Flying Circus. Göring brought impressive credentials, having achieved 22 victories and earned the Pour le Mérite, but he was a fundamentally different type of leader than his predecessors. Where Richthofen had led through tactical genius and cold professionalism, and Reinhard through steady competence, Göring relied on political connections and theatrical gestures. He had previously commanded Jasta 27, where he had demonstrated both flying skill and a talent for self-promotion. Göring understood that by mid-1918, the war was likely lost, and he focused as much on preserving the reputation and traditions of the unit as on achieving tactical victories. Under Göring's leadership, Jasta 11 underwent significant changes in both personnel and tactics. The squadron had received the excellent Fokker D7 fighter in April-May 1918, replacing the now obsolete triplanes. The D-7 was arguably the finest fighter aircraft of the war, combining excellent performance at all altitudes with docile handling characteristics that made it effective even in the hands of inexperienced pilots. This technological advantage helped offset the declining quality of replacement pilots, as Germany's reserves of trained aviators had been largely exhausted by 4 years of intensive combat. The summer of 1918 saw Jasta 11 engaged in some of the war's most desperate fighting. The German spring offensive had initially achieved spectacular success, but by July, the Allied counteroffensive was pushing German forces back along the entire front. Jagdstaffel was constantly in action, moving from crisis point to crisis point, in an increasingly futile attempt to maintain air superiority against overwhelming Allied numerical superiority. During this period, the squadron's leadership underwent constant changes at the Staffel level. Lothar von Richthofen, Manfred's younger brother, had commanded Jasta 11 intermittently throughout 1917 and 1918. But his frequent wounds meant that temporary commanders were often needed. The position seemed almost cursed commanders were killed, wounded, or transferred with alarming regularity. This instability at the squadron level was partially offset by the strong institutional culture that had been established under Manfred von Richthofen's leadership, which allowed the unit to maintain its effectiveness despite the chaos. One of the most significant challenges facing Göring and Jasta 11 during this period was the declining quality of resources available to the German military. Fuel shortages meant that training flights were curtailed, and pilots often went into combat with minimal preparation. The quality of replacement aircraft also declined as Germany's industrial capacity was stretched to its limits. Even the excellent Fokker D-7 could not overcome the overwhelming numerical superiority that the Allies enjoyed by late 1918. Despite these challenges, Jasta 11 continued to achieve victories at a remarkable rate. On the 28th of June 1918, the squadron recorded its 300th confirmed victory, a milestone that no other German fighter squadron would match. Individual pilots continued to distinguish themselves, with young aces like Lieutenant Ernst Udet, who would survive the war with 62 victories, carrying on the squadron's tradition of excellence. Göring's leadership during the final months of the war remains controversial among historians. Critics argue that he was more concerned with personal glory and political maneuvering than with the welfare of his pilots. Supporters counter that he did his best under impossible circumstances, maintaining unit cohesion and fighting spirit even as Germany's military situation became hopeless. What is undeniable is that under his command, Jagdstaffel, I remained an effective fighting force until the very end of hostilities. The final weeks of the war saw Jasta 11 fighting a series of desperate rearguard actions as German forces retreated toward their own borders. The squadron's last confirmed victory came on the 19th of September 1918, when Lieutenant Julius Schulte-Frohlind shot down a British RE-8 reconnaissance aircraft. By this time, the pilots knew that the war was lost, but they continued to fly and fight, driven by a combination of duty, pride, and the warrior ethos that had been instilled in them. As October 1918 progressed, the situation became increasingly desperate. Allied advances on the ground forced constant relocations of airfields, and mechanical reliability suffered as maintenance became increasingly difficult. Pilots flew with patched-up aircraft, using whatever fuel and ammunition could be scrounged. Yet, even in these final days, the reputation of Jasta 11 remained such that Allied pilots approached encounters with the squadron's distinctively marked aircraft with considerable caution. The leadership transitions of 1918 had transformed Jasta 11 from Richthofen's precision instrument into something different but equally formidable, a band of survivors bound together by shared experience and institutional tradition. While the tactical genius of the Red Baron could never be replaced, the squadron had developed a collective identity that transcended any individual leader. This organizational resilience would prove to be one of Richthofen's most enduring legacies. The story of Jasta 11 cannot be told without examining the remarkable individuals who flew its distinctive aircraft. While Manfred von Richthofen remains the most famous, the squadron produced a constellation of aces whose skills, personalities, and fates illuminate different aspects of the unit's character. These men came from diverse backgrounds, but were united by their exceptional flying abilities and their membership in Germany's elite fighter squadron. Werner Voss stands out as perhaps the most naturally gifted pilot ever to serve with Jasta 11. Born in 1897, Voss was just 19 years old when he joined the squadron. Yet he possessed an instinctive understanding of three-dimensional combat that amazed even veteran pilots. Unlike Richthofen's calculated approach, Voss flew by pure instinct, throwing his aircraft through maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. His Fokker triplane, painted with a distinctive face on the cowling, became one of the war's most recognizable aircraft. Voss's combat style was the antithesis of Richthofen's methodical tactics. Where the Red Baron advocated careful positioning and decisive strikes, Voss reveled in the chaos of the dogfight. He would deliberately engage multiple opponents, using his extraordinary situational awareness and reflexes to keep track of threats from all directions. His fellow pilots described watching him fly as witnessing an artist at work, every movement flowing naturally into the next, creating a deadly aerial ballet. During his time with Jasta 11 and later as commander of Jasta 10 within Jagdstaffel 1, Voss achieved 48 confirmed victories in just over a year of combat flying. His most famous engagement, the epic single-handed fight against 7 British aces on the 23rd of September, 1917, has become legendary. Even his opponents were awed by his skill. James McCudden, one of the British pilots involved, later wrote that Voss was the bravest German pilot he had ever encountered. His death at age 20 robbed Germany of a pilot who many believed could have rivaled or even surpassed Richthofen's victory tally. Ernst Udet represented yet another archetype within Jasta 11, the showman, who combined serious combat skills with an irrepressible personality. Born into a middle-class Munich family, Udet initially struggled to gain acceptance in the military aviation service due to his small stature and unconventional attitude. However, his natural flying ability quickly became apparent, and by early 1918, he had attracted Richthofen's attention. Udet's time with Jasta 11 was marked by both spectacular victories and theatrical gestures. He decorated his aircraft with personal emblems and slogans, including the phrase "Du noch nicht," not you yet, painted on his elevator. His flying style combined precision marksmanship with acrobatic flair, and he became known for his ability to score victories in seemingly impossible situations. After briefly commanding Jasta 11, Udet was transferred to lead Jasta 4, where he continued to add to his score. By war's end, Udet had achieved 62 confirmed victories, making him the highest scoring German ace to survive the conflict. His post-war career as a stunt pilot and his eventual tragic fate as a Luftwaffe general in World War II added further chapters to an already remarkable story. Within Jasta 11, he represented the romantic ideal of the fighter pilot, skilled, daring, and slightly larger than life. Lothar von Richthofen, Manfred's younger brother, embodied yet another aspect of the squadron's character. Where Manfred was calculating and methodical, Lothar was aggressive and impulsive. He joined Jasta 11 inches March 1917 and quickly proved that flying skill ran in the family, achieving 40 victories by war's end. However, his aggressive tactics also resulted in frequent wounds. He was shot down and injured several times, leading to long absences from the front. Lothar's relationship with his famous brother was complex. While Manfred respected Lothar's courage and flying ability, he frequently criticized his younger brother's recklessness. The two represented opposite poles of fighter pilot philosophy, Manfred's cold professionalism versus Lothar's hot-blooded aggression. Yet both approaches proved effective within the framework of Jasta 11's tactical system, demonstrating the squadron's ability to accommodate different flying styles. Karl Schaefer exemplified the skilled but often overlooked pilots who formed the backbone of Jasta 11's success. Without the flamboyance of Udet or the family name of the Richthofens, Schaefer quietly accumulated 30 victories through steady competence and strict adherence to squadron tactics. He represented the professional warrior who saw aerial combat as a job to be done efficiently rather than a stage for personal glory. Schaefer's death on the 5th of June 1917 illustrated the random nature of aerial combat. Despite his skill and experience, He was shot down by a lucky burst from a two-seater's observer, a reminder that in the deadly lottery of air combat, even the best pilots were vulnerable to chance. His loss was deeply felt within the squadron, where he had served as a mentor to newer pilots and a steady presence during the tumultuous spring of 1917. The squadron also included several pilots who would go on to significant careers after the war. Besides Goering and Udet, pilots like Friedrich Christensen and Hans-Georg von der Osten survived the conflict and played various roles in interwar German aviation. Their experiences with Jasta 11's shaped their understanding of air warfare and influenced the development of military aviation doctrine in the years between the world wars. Karl Allmenröder, though his time as squadron commander was tragically brief, deserves special mention. In his short career, he achieved 30 victories and earned the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest decoration for valor. His tactical innovations, particularly in the use of coordinated attacks by multiple aircraft, influenced squadron doctrine even after his death. Allmenröder represented the intellectual approach to aerial combat, constantly analyzing and refining tactics to maximize effectiveness. The non-commissioned pilots of Jasta 11 also played crucial roles in the squadron's success. Men like Sebastian Festner, who achieved 12 victories before his death in April 1917, proved that skill and courage were not limited to the officer class. These NCO pilots often flew as wingmen to the more famous aces, providing the protective support that allowed the high scorers to focus on attacking enemy aircraft. Each of these aces brought something unique to Jasta 11, contributing to a collective identity that transcended individual achievement. They created a culture of excellence where different approaches to aerial combat could coexist and complement each other. Whether through Richthofen's cold calculation, Voss's instinctive brilliance, Udet's theatrical flair, or Schaefer's steady competence, they all contributed to making Jasta 11 the most successful fighter squadron of World War I. The squadron's ability to produce and nurture such exceptional pilots was not accidental. The combination of excellent equipment, superior tactics, strong leadership, and institutional knowledge created an environment where talented pilots could maximize their potential. The mentoring system ensured that experience was passed on, while the competitive atmosphere pushed pilots to constantly improve their skills. As the autumn of 1918 progressed, the pilots of Jasta 11 could see that Germany's defeat was inevitable. The Great German Offensive of spring 1918 had failed, and Allied forces were pushing toward German borders on all fronts. Yet the squadron continued to fight with remarkable determination, maintaining its reputation as an elite unit even as the entire German military structure crumbled around it. The final weeks of the war would test the squadron's resolve and ultimately cement its place in aviation history. By October 1918, Jasta 11 was operating under increasingly desperate conditions. Fuel shortages meant that patrols were limited, and pilots often had to choose between combat missions and training flights. The quality of replacement pilots had deteriorated dramatically. Germany had simply run out of experienced aviators, and new pilots arrived at the squadron with minimal training. Veterans like Oberleutnant Erich Rüdiger von Wedel, who had assumed command of Jasta 11 inches September 1918, struggled to maintain operational effectiveness with increasingly limited resources. The squadron's final base was at Darmstadt, where they had retreated as Allied forces advanced. The airfield was a far cry from the well-equipped bases they had operated from during the height of their success. Supplies were erratic, spare parts were almost impossible to obtain, and even basic maintenance became a challenge. Yet the ground crews, who had been with the squadron through its years of glory, worked miracles to keep the aircraft flying. Their dedication to Jasta 11 matched that of the pilots, and their efforts during these final weeks deserved as much recognition as any aerial victory. On the 11th of November, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns fell silent as the armistice came into effect. For the pilots of Jasta 11, the sudden end to hostilities was both a relief and a profound shock. They had been warriors for so long that the prospect of peace seemed almost incomprehensible. Under the terms of the armistice, all German military aircraft were to be surrendered to the Allies, a requirement that many pilots found deeply humiliating. The official disbandment of Jasta 11 took place on the 16th of November 1918 at Darmstadt. The ceremony was simple and subdued, a far cry from the glory days when the squadron had been the pride of the German air service. The pilots gathered one last time, their distinctive aircraft already stripped of weapons and prepared for surrender. The squadron's battle flag was ceremonially retired, and the unit that had terrorized Allied pilots for 2 years officially ceased to exist. The final statistics of Jasta 11 remain impressive even a century later. The squadron was credited with 350 confirmed aerial victories, far exceeding any other German fighter squadron of the war. 20 of its pilots achieved ace status with 5 or more victories, and the squadron produced some of the war's highest scoring aces. Against these achievements, the unit suffered 17 pilots killed in action, 2 captured as prisoners, 2 killed in flying accidents, and 19 wounded in action, a casualty rate of less than 1/10 of their confirmed victories, an extraordinary ratio by any measure. The influence of Jasta 11 extended far beyond its impressive victory tally. The squadron pioneered tactics that would become standard in aerial warfare for decades to come. The emphasis on height advantage, coordinated attacks, and concentration of force became fundamental principles of fighter combat. The concept of the mobile fighter wing, able to achieve local air superiority through concentrated deployment, influenced Air Force organization in numerous countries between the wars. Several veterans of Jasta 11 played significant roles in the development of interwar aviation. Ernst Udet became a celebrated stunt pilot and aircraft designer before tragically becoming involved with the Nazi regime. Hermann Göring's path from war hero to war criminal remains one of history's most dramatic falls from grace. Other veterans pursued more positive contributions, working in civil aviation or helping to preserve the history of early military aviation. The tactical innovations developed by Jasta 11 influenced military aviation doctrine worldwide. The squadron's emphasis on systematic training, standardized tactics, and institutional knowledge transfer became models for fighter units in many air forces. The concept of the ace, while not originated by Jasta 11, was certainly perfected and popularized by the squadron's famous pilots. The public fascination with fighter aces that emerged during World War I and continues today owes much to the legendary status achieved by Jasta 11's pilots. The colorful aircraft of Jasta 11 also left a lasting cultural impact. The image of brightly painted German fighters, particularly Richthofen's red machines, became iconic symbols of World War I aviation. These distinctive paint schemes influenced military aircraft decoration policies and continue to fascinate aviation enthusiasts. Museums worldwide display replicas of Jasta 11 aircraft, and the squadron's history remains one of the most studied aspects of World War I aviation. The debate over Jasta 11's true effectiveness continues among historians. Critics argue that the squadron's impressive victory claims were inflated, pointing to the difficulties in confirming aerial victories and the tendency of all air services to overcount their successes. Supporters counter that Jasta 11's confirmation system was actually more rigorous than most, and that even if some victories were overclaimed, the squadron's dominance was undeniable. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But what cannot be disputed is the psychological impact the squadron had on both sides during the war. The human cost of Jasta 11's success must also be acknowledged. Behind every victory claim was an Allied airman killed, wounded, or captured. The squadron's efficiency in destroying enemy aircraft meant hundreds of young men lost their lives or suffered terrible injuries. The glorification of aerial combat often obscures this reality, but the pilots of Jasta 11 were instruments of death in an industrialized war that claimed millions of lives. Their skill and courage were undeniable, but they served a cause that brought devastation to Europe. The story of Jasta 11 also illuminates the rapid technological and tactical evolution of aerial warfare. In just 2 years, the squadron witnessed and participated in the transformation of military aviation, from a curiosity to a decisive military arm. The progression from the squadron's early struggles with inferior aircraft to its dominance with advanced fighters like the Fokker D-7 represents the compressed technological development that characterized World War I. Aviation The squadron's legacy raises important questions about the nature of military excellence and the warrior ethos. The pilots of Jasta 11 displayed exceptional skill, courage, and dedication to their duty. They created innovations that advanced the art of aerial warfare and established traditions that influenced military aviation for generations. Yet they fought for a regime that would ultimately be judged as the aggressor in a catastrophic war. This complexity makes Jasta 11 a fascinating subject for historical study, a unit that achieved tactical brilliance in service of a strategic failure. In popular culture, Jasta 11, and particularly the Red Baron, have achieved almost mythical status. Books, films, songs, and games have portrayed the squadron's exploits, often romanticizing aerial combat while glossing over its deadly reality. This cultural phenomenon speaks to a deep human fascination with individual combat and warrior skill, even in an age of industrialized warfare. The pilots of Jasta 11, particularly Richthofen, have become symbols of a supposed cleaner form of warfare, though the reality was far more complex and brutal. As we reflect on Jasta 11's history more than a century later, several lessons emerge. The squadron demonstrated the importance of leadership, training, and institutional culture in creating military excellence. It showed how technological advantage, when combined with superior tactics, could achieve disproportionate results. It also revealed the human capacity for extraordinary performance under extreme conditions and the strong bonds that form among warriors facing death together. The disbandment ceremony at Darmstadt in November 1918 marked the end of Jasta 11 as a military unit, but not the end of its influence. The squadron's tactics were studied at military academies, its pilots' memoirs became bestsellers, and its aircraft became museum pieces. Veterans gathered at reunions to share memories and maintain the bonds forged in combat. Even as the last veterans passed away, the squadron's history continued to fascinate new generations interested in military aviation. Today, Jasta 11 remains the most famous fighter squadron of World War I. Its reputation intact despite the passage of time and changing perspectives on the war. The squadron represents both the apex of individual warrior skill in aerial combat and the emergence of air power as a decisive military force. Its story encompasses triumph and tragedy, innovation and destruction, heroism and loss. The red aircraft of Jasta 11 have become enduring symbols of a pivotal moment in military history when Knights of the Air jousted above the muddy trenches of the Western Front. The complete story of Jagdstaffel 11 ultimately transcends its impressive statistics and famous pilots. It represents a unique moment in military history when individual skill could still determine outcomes before aerial warfare became dominated by technology and mass production. The squadron's 2-year existence coincided with and contributed to the birth of modern air power. From its humble beginnings under Rudolf Lang to its dissolution at war's end, Jasta 11 wrote a chapter in military history that continues to resonate today. The pilots who flew its colorful aircraft into combat above the Western Front created a legacy that endures not just in record books and museums, but in the fundamental principles of aerial warfare that emerged from their experiences. Their story serves as both a testament to human skill and courage and a reminder of the devastating cost of war.